Hello, and welcome back to the Survive France podcast, where I tell all of the listeners all of the mistakes I've made over many, many years in France, hopefully, so that you won't make the same mistakes at least, and hopefully along the way simplify and demystify some of the things that come up time and time again about living in France. Now, I can't remember who said it, but there's the famous quote about the only thing in life that's certain is death and taxes. And that definitely applies to anybody in France. Taxes are a big deal in France, and unfortunately, we're all going to die one day. So today we're going to be tackling that subject in terms of how it relates to some of you living in France. So this episode is really important. I would say it's essential listening for anybody in France or thinking about moving to France. So today I'm very pleased to say that I've got Tom Marron from Blevins Franks. There we go. First stumble over my words. Blevins Franks in the studio with me, who is hopefully going to give us a bit of insight because, yet again, as you all know very well, when it comes to anything to do with numbers, money or finances, I'm absolutely hopeless. So, hi Tom, thanks very much for joining us today.
Hello, no problem, and thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
Not at all. So maybe we can start with you telling us, me, our listeners, a bit about you, who you are, how you came to be doing what you're doing, and obviously who you do it for.
Okay, all right. So as you said at the start, my name is Tom Marron. I'm one of the partners for Blevins Franks. For those of your listeners or viewers who don't know, Blevins Franks is a firm that deals with strategic tax and financial planning. We help people who are resident in France and help people who are thinking about becoming resident in France. And it's all about tax optimization. It's looking at how people have currently got their situation structured and organized and helping them to reorganize that to be as tax efficient as possible for the French system. Blevins Franks has been doing this for a long time. This year, in fact, we've had our 50th anniversary. I can say that I've not been at Blevins Franks quite for that long, but I have been at Blevins Franks for the past 10 years. So I founded the offices in Béziers and Toulouse for Blevins Franks. I'm now more recently based in the Côte d'Azur with my wife and young children in a place called Valbonne, where we have already a very well-established office that's been here for about 20 years. And like yourself, I've been in France for a while, so I know about a lot of the challenges that people face when they move to France. So I'm able to advise on it. I know that you did an episode recently, Catherine, on applying for French nationality. I've been through that process myself. So I'm a dual French-British national. But as I say, I moved to France just over 10 years ago. And I'm familiar with all the kind of foibles of the French system and how to deal with those. And of course, one of the areas that we're asked about quite a lot at Blevins Franks is succession planning, and I understand that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, we are, because it is one thing that comes up, excuse me, time and time again, both on the Survive France forum and in questions that come in from podcast listeners, because it is, like you said, I think when you live in another country and you being French based and having been here for a while, you understand the foibles, shall we say, of the French approach to things, and it is different. And this is something that it does come up again and again because people don't really understand how it works. And I think that the difference factor is quite daunting. So maybe you can tell us a bit about French succession inheritance rules.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think there are two elements that people should be aware of when they are looking at French succession planning. So the first is how your assets are distributed when you die. And the second is taxation. So if we take the first one to start with, in France, we have a system of forced heirship. So if you have children, then your children are considered to be your protected heirs, and they are automatically entitled to a certain proportion of your estate. So if you have one child, they're entitled to 50%, two children are entitled to 2/3, and three or more children are entitled to 3/4 by default. I say by default because there are certain things that you can do to circumvent that, but the starting position is that is what will apply. Now, this can be very disadvantageous for the surviving spouse because they have, by contrast, a much fewer rights under the French system, and so it's an area that people need to really plan very seriously for. The second element is taxation. So many of your listeners may be familiar with the UK system, which is quite straightforward because you have a tax-free allowance, which is quite generous in the UK, and then above that you've got 40% tax. It's just a very straightforward system. In France, the tax rate depends on, first of all, who is inheriting and what their relationship is to you, and the second element is the amount that they're receiving. So, for example, children in the direct line, the tax rate can be as high as 45%, but it can also be as low as 5%, depending on the amount being inherited. People who are not related, so for example, stepchildren or just family friends, they get a very small tax-free allowance, but then everything is taxed at 60%, which can be quite punitive. But again, fortunately, there are things that you can do. There are certain ways that you can organize your wealth and your assets to make sure that actually you really avoid these higher rates of tax. And in some cases, with the planning that we do, it can eliminate tax for our clients. So I would say those are the two main elements for people to be aware of. The first is the forced heirship, and then secondly is the tax system of taxation.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. And do you find when you're chatting to clients or potential clients that there are often sort of major misconceptions, misunderstandings with people not really grasping how the system works?
Yeah, I think from time to time we do see that. We do seminars up and down the country in France. We tend to do them once a year, and they're very well received, very popular. But sometimes people come up to us at the start of a seminar and they'll say to us, I see that you're covering French inheritance planning today. Well, actually, I don't think this particular area is relevant to me because I've got all of my assets in the UK, or most of my assets in the UK, and I've done a UK will, and I've elected for everything to go according to my UK will, so I don't need to worry about it. So this is a major misconception, because the first thing that they should be aware of is that if you are a French resident and if you die as a French resident, then the rule is that your worldwide estate will be assessed for French succession tax. So it doesn't matter if you've got assets in the UK or the Isle of Man or Jersey or Guernsey or
That's
Jersey.
good. That covers both. I like that. That's really good, Guernsey.
Yeah, or Singapore or Australia, wherever the assets are in the world, they will be assessed for French succession tax. So that's a really important one to consider. The other notion is this idea that people have that they can elect for an English will or a Scottish will to apply to their assets instead of using French succession law. And this is a major misconception because although European law does allow you to elect for the law of your nationality to apply when it comes to succession, the French system doesn't. Actually, the two legal systems, the European legal system and the French system, at the moment, as of today, and we're recording this in late October, they conflict, and the conflict hasn't been resolved yet. So the problem is that if somebody elects for all of their assets to go to a surviving spouse instead of their children, or maybe even to family friends or somebody else, if they're disinheriting their children, or if it is perceived that they're disinheriting their children by the French authorities, then there's a compensation mechanism that can kick in, and effectively the French authorities can use French assets to compensate the children. So it is a complex area and it does require careful planning. But I would say those are the two major misconceptions. One is, the notion or the idea that assets outside of France might not be taxed, when of course actually they are. And secondly is the notion that you can elect for the law of your nationality to apply. Well, you can, but it might only have a limited effect and may not be that beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good to know. And I would imagine they are that a lot of people are kind of unaware of that, because it is a slightly ambiguous kind of situation currently, shall we say. Another classic example of the French ignoring laws when they choose to do so. But yeah, that's the reality. So I guess my next question would have to be, are there specific areas where, getting expert advice is a priority or even absolutely essential?
Yeah, I think there are a few areas where advice, I mean, in every situation, I think advice can be useful, but in particular, if people have stepchildren, if you have a situation where it's a mixed family, maybe there are children from a previous relationship on one side of the marriage, that definitely requires some thought, because you're up against two problems there. The first is the forced heirship rules can be extremely disadvantageous to potentially to the surviving spouse, and the second is you're looking or your beneficiaries are looking down the barrel at a 60% tax rate.
Mm.
So that's one area, and that's something that we advise on. It's actually quite a common situation. We advise on that a lot. I think the other area where people are often caught out is UK pensions. We encounter a lot of people that have their wealth in UK pension funds. And I don't mean kind of fund and salary schemes. I mean what we call defined contribution pensions, where maybe you have a pot of money in the UK and it's invested, but it's in a pension structure. Now, essentially, those pensions are not only subject to UK inheritance tax under the recent changes in the UK budget, they're also potentially assessed for French succession tax. Plus, if the person dies after the age of 75, then there's an income tax charge in the hands of the beneficiaries. So in some cases, you can have 40% UK inheritance tax plus up to 45% income tax on the residual amount that's left over. So it really does not allow very much to be inherited. But there are some really interesting restructuring options that French residents can take advantage of, and that can potentially get the inheritance tax or the succession tax down to zero. And that's an area that we deal with a lot.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good to know. So, what kind of strategies should people be thinking about, about putting into place? I know that's a bit of a how long is a piece of string type question, because obviously everybody's situation is different. But generally, from the kind of the clients that you see that you're chatting to, what would you say they should be thinking about?
I think that first of all, and this probably sounds like quite a strange one, but marriage regimes in France, we have different categories of marriage contract. So how your marriage contract is written determines how your assets will be distributed on death. And one of the things that is quite common is people will sign up for what is called the Communauté Universelle, which is the community marriage regime. And effectively, it means that whoever is the last survivor in a couple has full ownership of the assets. So it can be a really important and really powerful one that people can look at. I think gifting is useful if you're thinking about coming to France, but you're not yet resident. There's an opportunity potentially for you to gift large sums out of your estate before you become a French resident. Once you've moved to France, it's a bit more restrictive. So that's an area that we can potentially advise on. I suppose the only problem with gifting is one never knows when you might need the money. So you don't necessarily want to gift away too much of your wealth. And then one key area that we deal with quite a lot is restructuring of investments. So a lot of people that approach us have their investments in structures in the UK that are very effective when they're UK resident, but unfortunately are just not very tax efficient when they're French resident. And one of the things that we help them do is reorganize them into structures that allow them not only to optimize their ongoing tax situation, but also reduce or potentially avoid French succession tax. So I know that you've discussed it on a previous episode, but there exists a type of investment called assurance vie, which is very widely used in France. Literally means life insurance, but I suppose it's a bit of a misnomer because really it's just an investment structure. But the idea of assurance vie is that it allows you to nominate beneficiaries, and it's outside of the scope of normal French succession law and normal French succession taxes. So you can nominate €152,500 to go tax-free to each beneficiary. So for a couple, for example, with 3 children, there's 2 of them and there's 3 children, so that's 6 lots of 152,500. So it's over €900,000 that can potentially go tax-free to the next generation by using an assurance fee. But as with many things in France, it just needs to be set up in the right way. It needs to have the right type of beneficiary clauses. It needs to be based in the right jurisdiction. Even though we're dealing with French tax planning, we're very often using structures that are actually based outside of France. So we very commonly look at, for example, at Luxembourg or the Republic of Ireland as being potential place to structure those investments. And we're also looking at long-term situations as well. So we're very mindful that in many cases our clients will eventually go back to the UK. And that's another huge area for planning, because if somebody goes back to the UK, it can actually be very beneficial. There is a possibility for them to, once they've returned to the UK, avoid UK inheritance tax for a further 10 years. So those are the areas that I think that people ought to be aware of. Things that don't work well in France, trust planning. We see a lot of people that come over from the UK and they've got their money set up in complex trust arrangements. While that works often extremely well in the UK, the French take a dim view of it in general. I think that trust structures are, while they're not illegal, they are generally treated with a degree of suspicion, and it's seen as quite an aggressive form of tax avoidance, and they certainly don't have any tax benefits. So generally, trust planning in France is a bit of a no-no.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. I mean, it's quite funny actually how things are so different from one country to another, because I only discovered quite recently that wood, as in trees planted in woods, is tax-free. The income you get from it is tax-free, and when you inherit woodland, that's also completely tax-free, which is why all the super rich invest in wood.
Okay.
And even down to flogging their properties before they kind of reach the natural kind of end of their lifespan, buying wood for their children to then inherit, who can then sell the wood they harvest tax-free, and then sell the woodland tax-free and rebuy the ancestral home or family seat. Or, I mean, I had no idea that wood was just such a nice little tax loophole. So yeah, there's all this kind of stuff to be aware of. So I guess from what you've said today, my takeaway of this is that if you have any queries whatsoever about your tax planning or inheritance or succession issues, because France is so different to the UK and the way things work are different, it's almost essential, I would say, to speak to a professional, because nobody wants to pay any more tax than they have to, is the
Yeah,
bottom line.
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And Blevins Franks is well placed to be able to help people with that, because we are experts not only in the UK tax system, but in the French tax system. And we understand about how the two systems interact with each other, which is critical when it comes to inheritance planning.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely right. It's an area that is complex. It can be made simpler by taking advice.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Tom. It was really good to chat to you. And if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do it? On the Survive France forum? Or shall we drop a link into have you got a Calendly? That's another word I can never pronounce. Can people, if I drop a link into the show notes, can people book direct?
We don't have a Calendly link, but probably the best way for people to arrange an appointment is to call me.
All right.
So
I'll
I can
drop
put,
your contact details into the show notes then, so that
yeah,
people can get in touch direct.
okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to you, our lovely listeners, and thank you very much to our sponsors, Fab French Insurance, who aim to make your life as simple as Frenchly possible. I hope this has been fun, informative, and interesting. I'll put the emphasis on the informative and interesting rather than fun. And see you all next time. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye bye.